Kia ora team, Noel Willoff here. Thanks so much for tuning into today's episode. But there's one important thing I want to say before you watch this video. I've noticed that over 91% of you who watch our content on YouTube do not subscribe to the podcast. My promise to you is if you subscribe to the podcast, I'll continue to get more of the guests on that you love and make sure that this conversation and this podcast grows to new levels. So please hit that subscribe button. Secondly, a massive shout out to our official sponsor of the podcast, Moana Road. If you want to save some cash and get some of their awesome gears, head to their website and plug in BTS20 and you'll get 20% off all of their products. Save some cash, support the podcast. Hope you enjoyed this conversation. Rowan, welcome to the podcast.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Super excited to have you on the podcast, and I think there's so much to really crack into with your story, and especially your book. We've strategically positioned it.
Thank you. Yeah.
How to Be Wrong, and I guess I wanted to start there. Like, what has the process been like writing your first book?
Oh yeah. I mean, in some ways, I've been writing forever. Like I started blogging in 2006 when I was still working at Trade Me, so I've sort of been writing these stories constantly for like 20 years. But still, like it's been a really interesting exercise to package it up into a book. The genesis for that project was really 2021. So I had this crazy idea in January 2021 to try and drain a drafts folder, basically, of all the things that I'd half written. And so I started a Substack and tried to publish something every Sunday for the whole year. And yeah, I got to the end of that year, thought I'd finished the project. And what I discovered talking to some friends is that they thought I was just starting a project because that was sort of the basis for a lot of the content. So yeah, it doesn't really, I mean, people ask me how long it took to write and I don't know how to answer it because in some ways the answer is 20 years. In some ways the answer is it kind of sort of wrote itself in the meantime. So
have you always been quite like a disciplined writer? Because that must be, if you've always been writing essays and different blog posts since 2006, there must be some dedicated time that you spend every week putting aside to writing.
I mean, definitely in that year when I was doing it, that took a lot of effort each week. But no, I mean, writing's a muscle, eh? Like you can build it just like any other muscle. And when I first started, I wasn't definitely not good at it. Like I wouldn't say it was a natural strength, but it's something you can get better at if you do it enough. And so yeah, like in many ways, if you go back to a lot of the best bits of writing over those 20 years. It was really me just thinking out loud. Like I was in some ways trying to work out what I actually believed. And the discipline of publishing it at the end of that really forces your thinking. You know, it really sharpens. And often you'll start, I mean, I experienced this. I assume this is common for writers, but often you'll start writing something and when you try and actually articulate it like in words, you realize that what you thought you believed is actually not what you believe. So it can sort of form your thinking as well.
So do you think you, as like a principle, write for yourself or write for others?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very selfish exercise, actually. I mean, the book is maybe the exception to that. Like I've thought a lot more in the process of putting the book together about the audience. But most of the time when I'm writing, yeah, it's just kind of capturing what I've learned or capturing something that I've realized or something, a pattern that I want to share.
Keen to go back to the early days and we'll venture into your sort of story in a bit more detail. But I wanted to sort of touch on, was there anything, I guess, about your upbringing that influences strongly how you operate today?
Yeah, I've been asked about this a little bit through this book launch process, actually. It's such a confronting question because it's a little bit like the goldfish doesn't know that it lives in water, Like I always thought my childhood was completely normal. Like I would have described it as very average. But yeah, just what it was. But like a lot of things obviously shape you when you're young, and there are various stories in the book about that were pretty formative for me. Yeah, I mean, even I mean, I've got a brother and two sisters, so like that kind of nuclear family. Yep. And all the influences of that, like the competitive nature with me and my brother, for example. But yeah, lots of things, but nothing that I am super sort of conscious of because it's just what happened to me. I don't know what the comparison should be.
Where do you think your ambition came from? Like, do you have really sort of ambitious parents? Was that distilled in you from a young age?
I mean, it was we're definitely encouraged to work hard. Like that was, again, sort of, I would just describe that as average, but it's only really later in life that I realized how unaverage that was. But yeah, like, we're expected to put full effort into everything, I don't know. Ambition is such a complicated word. A good friend of mine, Julie, And Hayden wrote this book called Ambition, which is worth looking up if you can find it. And they kind of spoke to a lot of different New Zealanders from a really diverse, backgrounds and experiences and success even. And it's fascinating the different ways that different people define that. So, my version of ambition and your version of ambition could be quite different. I don't know either of them would necessarily be wrong.
Yeah.
It's similar to that as you were asking about the writing. It's quite selfish. Like, I think I would almost describe my ambition similarly. Like, I am my harshest judge, and what other people might perceive of that is what it is.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I've got this thing. Like, I wonder if you feel the same. Sometimes I feel like New Zealanders they can be more ambitious. And it might be like sort of linked into, and I know you've got some interesting thoughts around like tall poppy syndrome as well. But I wonder if there is this sort of culture that sort of like whacks down on people being too ambitious. I don't know if you've experienced that. I guess the whole tall poppy syndrome thing is a real interesting debate.
Yeah.
Something that we hear about lots. So
I'd love to talk more about that, because I feel like I do almost have unusual perspective on that. Like, I feel like tall poppy syndrome in New Zealand is almost axiomatic. Like, we just accept that it's something about us, and we all know that it's a bit crap, but we just sort of nod and bear with it. And actually, I really love challenging people on it. So let me try challenging you on it. It's like, I love to not just accept it as a kind of innate trait, and sort of actually drill in on the people who get cut down and the people who we celebrate. Because like one of the things I like to say, it's one of the things I've written, is we celebrate a lot of people. If you stop and think about it, like, you've had some of those folks on this podcast, and they've been very successful, and broadly speaking, we're proud of them for that. Think of, sports people are the obvious examples, but people like Edmund Hillary, Neil Finn, think of our Olympians like Lisa Carrington or Elise Andrews, or, like there's just like actually quite a few examples when you stop and think about it, of people who aren't cut down. They're actually put on a pedestal, and we celebrate their achievements, and we're proud of them collectively, right? So what's the difference? Like, what's the difference between them and the people who do get cut down? And this is my theory on it. Fascinated to hear your perspective on it. Is that often the people who we cut down are people who have kind of gotten ahead of themselves. Like this whole fake it till you make it mindset is very prevalent in startups. And then, so what can happen then is like someone's, gotten ahead of themselves, talked a bigger story than their actual achievements. And then they come crashing, like that gap closes, and they feel like they've been cut down. Yeah. And I'm like, I don't know. Like, I feel like there's another way there. Like, you could have just been a bit more quiet on the way up. Yeah. And then the gap wouldn't have been quite so painful when it's shut. So yeah, like the example I give in the book is like, we love the All Black or Black Fern who scores a try and then puts their head down and runs straight back to halfway. Like, we wouldn't tolerate the American, NFL style celebration in that moment, right? Yeah. And even more than that, like the ones we really admire and respect are the All Blacks who point to the person who set the try up for them. Like TJ Pettinale, when he's on your podcast, was talking about scoring that hat trick in his first game, right? And but literally just fell over the try line 3 times, right? Like, if he was celebrating that achievement, then fair game, you should cut him down. Like, I wouldn't call that tall poppy, Yeah. So yeah, like it's way more nuanced than I think we acknowledge. And I think if we were a bit more specific about the behaviors that we actually don't tolerate, then that might help people avoid that kind of pain of feeling like they've been cut down.
It's a really good point. And I think as well, from like a perspective of like seeing young, because I feel like tall poppy syndrome in New Zealand really cuts down, especially ambition for like young people in that stage of their life when they're wanting to be ambitious. Yeah. And like, that's where they're like, okay, I'll actually just land for, maybe being mediocre or doing a different pathway.
Which is awful. Like, I honestly believe most people can do much more than they do, right? Like, most of us are capable of
so much more.
Yeah. And that's a really important message to encourage. And I think especially for kids, as you say, like, You know, like I love to say, just like be curious. Like, what are you curious about is a great question to ask kids. Like, you know, how does this work, for example?
Yeah.
It's a great question to drill into, and it really gets people thinking about. But yeah, like even this idea that, you know, everything is made by somebody and you could make stuff. Those are really important messages. But I think they have, in my opinion, it would be much healthier if they came coupled with, like, it's okay to do that development quietly. You don't have to put yourself in the spotlight prematurely. And if you are going to make mistakes and fail, which, by the way, 100% you will, because even the most successful people have failed much more than they've succeeded, then it's better to do that without everybody looking at you.
Yeah.
And so like the idea of encouraging ambition doesn't necessarily have to come coupled with push yourself into the spotlight, fake it till you make it, all of that stuff. Do you know what I mean? So I don't know. As I say, I feel like that's a slightly unusual opinion in New Zealand, but
could be your next book topic. Who knows?
Yeah.
Don't
fake it till you make it. Yeah. I mean, like, how to be wrong, right? Like that. It might sound stupidly, unnecessarily kind of humble, but I think that's sort of baked all the way through the story. It's a much healthier mindset. Assume you're wrong.
Yeah.
Like that's not a lack of ambition, but it is what possibly gets you there.
And that's what I love about your book as well, is it's you know, we hear so much about these companies that get put on a pedestal, and you're sort of breaking down the step-by-step process to how, you know, how Trade Me almost wasn't Trade Me that sold for $750 million to Fairfax, and you know, how Xero really struggled with like subscribers in the early days. So it's kind of just like humanizing that story a little bit more. Yeah,
I mean, when I committed to writing it as a book rather than a series of blog posts and essays, I was determined to start with those 4 near-death moments. So that's literally the first chapter.
It's a good hook,
and it is a good hook from a publishing perspective, but I think it's also the most important point to start on if you're going to try and tell the story the way that I'm telling it.
Yeah.
Because most people don't know those stories. Most people know the complete opposite, fake version of the stories, which is kind of up and to the right, you know? And none of those 4, I mean, I've had this amazing opportunity to work on 4 companies that have had, you know, outsized outcomes. And all 4, like maybe the only thing that they all have in common is that they all should have died probably at various points. And when you tell people that, they're often surprised. And at the same time, they're kind of often experiencing their own difficulties with the things they're working on. And they think they're unusual. And I'm like, that's not unusual at all. Actually, that's very common. And even in the most successful companies.
Has anyone ever called you New Zealand's Warren Buffett?
I've never been compared to Warren Buffett, no.
I was kind of thinking of that as I was like doing a bit of research, and I was like, man, the amount of successful exits on you know, 4 of some of New Zealand's most prominent technology companies, like there's something in there, I think.
Yeah. And I mean, you know, I write about this in the book. Like after I finished at Xero, like that was Xero's the last company that I worked on as an exec or an operator. And I became an investor after that, right? The first couple of companies I invested in are not companies that you probably know because they didn't go especially well. Like it was a whole new thing to learn. So there's actually like multiple waves to that. But yeah, like I guess the thing that the great privilege that I have is I've seen now 2 and 3 and 4 more of those companies, and you start to see the repeated patterns. And there are repeated patterns, like, and it's great to be able to kind of extract those and write about them, share them, because they can be applied to anybody's ventures. So yeah, maybe that's one thing that I have unconsciously picked up from Warren, or I would actually probably be more flattered by a comparison to Charlie Munger, who was Warren's far less well-known sidekick.
True.
Until he died a couple of years ago. But yeah, like both of those guys throughout their long careers, Charlie's dead now. Warren's actually
he just stepped down.
Just retired this weekend as we were recording this. But yeah, both of them have very generously shared all the things that they've learned and mistakes that they've made over the years. So yeah, maybe I've picked up some inspiration from that without being conscious of it.
So what did money mean to you, I guess, before you had it? And what does money mean to you now that you have it?
Yeah. So like goldfish in the fishbowl, when I was growing up, I never really thought about that. We just had what we had. There was a really kind of formative moment for me when I was about to start university, because this is going to show you how old I am now, but it was literally just as the government started to charge fees to university students.
True.
And so, yeah, one of the more difficult conversations I ever had with my folks was kind of saying, this is how much it's going to cost me to go to university. Like, can you pay that? And I mean, they contributed what they could, but the answer was not really.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that was very motivating for me. Like, as a student in those days, I did a 3-year degree, and it didn't stick around at university after that because I wanted to start earning money rather than spending it. So, yeah, I mean, that was a formative money moment. I would say, though, that a lot of people seen the stories of the successful companies. Like when you tell the stories of the successful companies, necessarily like the dollar outcomes get attached to them. And I think it's a mistake that many people make, is that they kind of aspire to that outcome and they start with that aspiration. And we did not start with that aspiration. Like, we didn't start working on Trade Me or Flat Hunt, which was my startup that sort of got folded into Trade Me, because we wanted to be rich. We started it because we saw a problem to solve and we wanted to work on that. And like, that's what actually gets you there. Yeah. If you start out just wanting to be rich, I don't know that I've seen many examples of people that gets them there.
Yeah. Is that something which is a bit of a, I guess, like red flag or red herring when you're working with different founders? I guess how transparent are potential founders or startups that is their end goal? I don't know.
I mean, there's one red flag I'll give you, which is the word entrepreneur. Like, anyone who describes themselves as an entrepreneur is a little warning sign to me.
Why is that?
Because it's an identity thing rather than, so their motivation often is to be to be seen as a founder, or to have that experience of starting a company or pitching investors or all those things. But actually the people who are the most successful founders don't normally describe themselves that way. They tend to narrow straight into the problem that they're trying to solve, or the customer that they are trying to attract, or those sorts of things. And a lot of them will bristle at that idea of being described as an entrepreneur, because it's kind of like, I don't know, it's a little bit like, like an aspiring actor in Hollywood who's actually a barista.
Yeah.
Like describing themselves as an actor.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah,
wow.
yeah.
Not yet.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's really interesting. I'm keen to like touch on, like, when you first realize that you thought differently, perhaps about risk than other people.
Yeah.
Particularly starting with Flat Hunt, which was like your first startup.
Yeah.
After university, once you studied computer science. Because at the time and in the book, you mentioned that your now wife was really like supporting you to sort of chase this dream.
Yeah.
So,
well, financially supporting.
Financially
I mean, Flat Hunt never paid me a salary. Like, I worked on it for a while. I got it to a steady state. It was covering its costs, but it never paid me a salary. So yeah, Emily was propping me up through that time.
So what made you, because I guess with a computer science degree, you could have went and like worked for the man, had a really successful career. What made you be like, actually, stuff this, I'm going to go all in with Flat Hunt? Yeah,
I mean, I did work for the man. I was suit and tie consultant for the first 3 years out of university, and I thought that was the obvious career path out of university for me, because that was kind of paid well and taught me a lot. And I have zero regrets about that, to be clear, because I did learn a huge amount from those 3 years about business, which kind of is quite different from computer science.
Very.
And even things like, sales and customers and all of those things. I was pretty naive as a young grad. But yeah, like I had a confronting exit interview when I did decide to leave that consulting firm to start Flat Hunt. Like the managing partner, who was an Aussie guy, actually said to me in that exit interview, "I think you're throwing your career away," which is kind of like, oof, when you're a young guy.
100%.
So, I mean, ironically, he was kind of right. Like, I'm unemployable now, right? Like, I did throw that career away. But the thing that I remember that really distinctly, because I didn't feel like I was taking a big risk in that moment. Like, it was the end of the .com bubble, so like there were a lot of people doing what I did. It wasn't especially unique. But at the same time, if it didn't work, I could probably always go back to wearing a suit and tie. Do you know what I mean? So it didn't really feel like plan B in that case was awful.
Yeah.
But plan A, if it worked, felt like it could be really great. And that's what happened. So I guess that's the answer to your question. Like I just thought differently about that risk and actually realized that it wasn't a big risk because the downside of it was pretty small.
Yeah. Was that hard?
It would have been embarrassing. Like it would have sucked to have to go back and sort of say, you know, can I do this kind of work again? I've tried this and it didn't work. But it would have burned a bit of time, but you know, it wouldn't have been fatal. Do you know what I mean?
So how many years were you working on Flat Hunt for before it got acquired by TradeMe?
Very short. Like it was within the same year because as I sort of saying, it never paid me a salary. So I burned through my savings reasonably quickly and needed to start doing some paid work to prop it up, to pay my share of the bills really. And yeah, so like one of those like little contracts that I picked up was from Sam and Phil, who was Sam's investor at TradeMe. So those guys had just invested $100,000 in TradeMe. And Sam was using that money to start to build a little team. So he hired his sister Jess, and then he hired me to do the software engineering.
Crazy. And famously, yeah, the third employee at TradeMe that didn't have the surname of, or the first employee that didn't have the surname of Morgan.
Yeah. And the fourth, I mean, there were really only four of us for quite a while. The fourth was my old friend Nigel Stanford, is again another name most people would never have heard of. But yeah, I mean, you know, we were an eclectic little bunch.
Did you believe in the vision of TradeMe when you first joined? Did you see the long-term future and potential?
That's a tough question to answer because the TradeMe I was hired to work on is very different from the TradeMe that you know and everybody loves. I mean, I think the most interesting thing about the early stages of TradeMe, like those first few years we worked on it, is the business model, because it was almost the exact opposite of what the business model ended up being. Like we were wrong about that, if you want to be pointed.
Yeah.
It was free classifieds. So it was free to list, free to buy, we were, you know, trying to find advertisers to support it. And there were famously these billboards that Sam bought, kind of distressed last minute billboards. And the message on the billboard was a big turkey. And the word said, only turkeys pay for classifieds. That was what we were selling. Do you know what I mean? That's what we were building. And it was really only a bit later that that auctions became obviously the part of that site that was going to fire. Like it was both classifieds and auctions, and still is. But and yeah, it was only really quite a few years later that we flipped that business model to start charging sellers. And we did that not because we were geniuses, but because we had to. We'd run out of money. And it turned out to be, a very lucrative business model. So
100%.
So yeah, the answer to your question is no, because what I was building, what I did believe in, wasn't ultimately successful.
Isn't hindsight amazing? You can sort of look back and just be like, wow, you know, at that moment you had no idea about the sort of upside or the potential.
Yeah, but again, such a repeated pattern, right? Yeah. So let me tell you a couple of the other stories. Like Xero, when I was hired to work on that, I was most excited about going straight to small businesses because we'd just come out of this environment at TradeMe where we'd had great success direct to consumer. And I sort of thought there was an opportunity to bypass accountants effectively with great tools direct for small businesses. And so that was wrong. You know, the thing that ultimately has turned Xero into an amazingly successful business is its distribution channel through accountants. And you know, most of the accounting firms around New Zealand and Australia and even in the UK now are Xero partners. Yeah. So I was wrong, completely wrong about that. 180 degrees wrong about that. You know, the early version of Vend that Vaughan first pitched me was this crazy, wacky loyalty mobile app idea. And he kind of stumbled across Point of Sale, which is the product that Vend ended up building and being famous for, as kind of what he thought he had to do that as kind of a gateway to the product that he really wanted to build. So, you know, like this is such a repeated pattern that I think it's a mistake to assume that the reverse could ever be true.
Does that get challenging for you as like a early stage investor? So you're trying to identify some of these companies that, you know, might just have like a founder or like a very small team, very early stage. With these stories that you're telling me, with some of these successful companies like TradeMe, Xero, Vend, the fact that their first idea ended up
Yeah.
being a complete 180.
Yeah.
Is there a lot of risk for you as an investor investing in these companies if you're on board this vision and then they totally change the business model or the challenge they're trying to solve?
Yeah. I try to not get too distracted by what I'd call the widget, like the specific product that they've built.
Right.
And I definitely try to avoid situations where people are excited about an invention because, again, this repeated pattern, it's very often incorrect, the first thing. And so, to counter that, I really over-index on people. Like the person is really what you're investing in at that early stage. And my most successful investments have been people that I've known for quite some time. Like it's very rare, probably very, very unlikely that I would invest in somebody whose first contact with me is an email saying, I'm trying to raise money. Will you invest?
True.
Because if we don't have that relationship already, it's a terrible start.
Yeah.
But that's again, my bias, my experience. Those are the sorts of things that I want to invest in. And I'll give you a more recent example. I'm an investor in a company called Prosaic. Founders of that are Nick Holdsworth and Rowan Alton, who are two very early Vend employees. So they're going again on their next venture. And I was pretty explicit with them when we invested. Like they had a product they'd built. It was kind of in a really interesting space. But I said to them, I'm not sure if that product is going to be the killer, but I'm pretty sure you'll be able to iterate on that and find something that could be amazing. So let's go. So that's a better pattern, I think.
So there's a huge degree of sort of trust in who you're trying to.
Yeah, because if you don't know how those people are going to react when things get hard, you'll find out soon.
Come out to bite you.
Yeah.
So you sell Flat Hunt to Trade Me. $10,000 of your own, sort of savings went into that. What did you learn, I guess, about product market fit from working so closely with a platform like Trade Me that's so essential to Kiwi life?
Great question. We would never have used those words, by the way. Like product market fit is a much more modern idea than Trade Me is. And so I think I probably learned a couple of really useful patterns and a couple of anti-patterns. So in the spirit of how to be wrong, I'll start with the anti-patterns. Like I learned this really quickly when I switched to working at Xero. Was we had this kind of blind spot at Trade Me because the product was so viral. Like we learned pretty quickly at Trade Me that if you could convince someone to sell something on the site, once they had that experience,
be hooked.
They would be totally addicted to it and they would tell everybody that they knew. And that was an amazing kind of distribution channel for us. We basically spent nothing on marketing, but we were super conscious in terms of product market fit, or what you'd retrospectively call product market fit, about making that experience happen. So, like we used to track the number of unique sellers daily as a really key metric, for example, because we knew if we could drive that, then that was our kind of flywheel. But we also, as a result, had this real negative pattern, which is we thought every business probably just, Sam and myself and others were always kind of vocally out there saying, marketing's a waste of money, which is true for us, but wasn't true for most businesses. But I think I'll give you a couple of other fits because I don't think I put a lot of weight on product market fit so much these days. There's a great quote about product market fit, which is if you have to ask whether you have it, the answer is no.
True.
Like once you've got it, it's not a question anymore. Like, I think what's much more useful to me is founder market fit. So like if you're pitching me an idea, I want to know what unique insight you have about this market and why you. Because your product is one thing, but anybody could build your product potentially. Like what's the unique insight that you've had? And so that's a different kind of fit. And then there's another one, which is founder investor fit. Like, okay, so why are you choosing me as your investor or vice versa? Because again, like as I was saying before, you'll find out pretty quickly how people behave when things get hard, because they always get hard. And people often don't expect them to get hard because they've only ever read the airbrush stories of success.
100%.
And if you don't have that good founder investor fit at that point, it's going to all fall over.
I can imagine it become very enticing for like any young or like anyone, right, who's first venturing into sort of startup land. You just want to take money from like basically anyone. It'd become exciting. It'd be like, man, I just need capital to get going. And you can commit yourself in many ways.
And I think it's a shame actually, because I feel like one of the myths that that's become very ingrained in New Zealand is that capital is that we're really short of capital, and as a result, we kind of coach founders to beg for it. You know, like they're very lucky to even have a conversation with an investor.
Yeah.
Like, please give me money. And then, as you say, like that sort of encourages this behavior where people take whatever money they get offered from whomever it will offer it to them. And what I like to say is, in my observation, the best founders actually they realize that capital isn't scarce. There's heaps of capital. It's almost infinite if you take a global perspective.
True.
And their job is to choose the best investors to invest in their thing and then convince them to invest in the company. And I mean, there's ways to do that, like offer them great terms, there's ways you can entice investors to invest in your thing, but be selective about it. And I think the best founders also realize that money is the first constraint, but it's not the greatest constraint. Like, as soon as you've raised money, then your job becomes spending that money. And that's really hard.
Yeah.
Like, to spend it well when there's so much uncertainty and, you know, you're under so much time pressure and all of those things is very, very difficult. And so having an investor who can kind of be on your side at that point and advise you through that is much more valuable than most people appreciate. So like, the money is useful, but the time that investors will put in to you is much more valuable.
Is that quite rare?
That mindset?
Yeah. Or is it rare to have investors to, you know, to be a bit more hands-on, like your approach with your investments? Or is it do they usually just, you know, send the check and off you go, good luck? Again,
this is another one of the goldfish and water questions, Noah, because I don't think it's unusual. Like, of course that's how you'd behave if you were an investor. Like, I can't sort of imagine not working that way. But then you look around and you realize that that's not the common experience.
True.
So yeah, I think it is. And again, it comes down to, like, why are you taking money from these people if they're not going to behave the way that you want them to behave, or the way that will help you the most?
Yeah. So. Yeah, really interesting. It's a whole different world, to really explore and unpack. Can you speak us through that moment where shit kind of went a bit wrong at TradeMe, and I was cracking up in the book? I've got a friend called Corin.
Yeah.
And it seemed like there was like a tech disaster where basically the code in the background was basically calling every member on the platform Corin.
Yeah.
Can you speak us through what happened there?
Yeah. So we made a mistake and accidentally updated the database. We were trying to rename one member to have the first name Corin. We ended up updating every single member to be called Corin. The reason why it's such a great story is the mistakes just compounded. So like, we quickly realized the mistake, took the site offline and started the process of restoring, but didn't realize that the automated jobs were still running. So like, all of the options were closing and the emails were being sent out saying, you know, hi Corin, for a start. So you'd get an email saying, hi Corin, your option's finished. The winning bidder is Corin. And like, all of them had those too, because every member was called Corin, right? So yeah, like, once we realized that, we like put a stop to that, and then had to email all the people who'd had these incorrect emails to, you know, try and correct the error. Except we messed that up as well. So the email that they got was like, you know, hi Corin, apologies. You know, we've mistakenly said, you know, the actual winning bidder of your option is Corin. And then the real little icing on the cake, the cherry on the top, was the signature at the bottom of those emails normally said, regards TradeMe support. And there was a member in the database called TradeMe support. But of course, that had been updated to Corin as well. So it was just one of those moments where, like, you know, the errors compounded and they got worse each time.
That's so funny.
Yeah. And it was, it's one of those kind of slapstick style, you know, moments. It's remarkable how often I've been able to use that story though to make somebody else feel a bit better when they've made a similarly dumb mistake.
Yeah. I guess that's not going out to just a couple of hundred people. There was like 36,000 people.
Yeah, there was a lot. It was in that order, and yeah, it took a while before we realized those options had rolled over too. So it was more than you'd feel comfortable about.
Crazy. That is so funny. When it came to I guess part of the TradeMe story where Sam Morgan was looking to sell, you mentioned the book, you guys sort of like went for a walk, or something along those lines, and he sort of mentioned it to you. Can you take us back to, I guess, that as being probably one of the most, like, a very pivotal moment, I guess, in your life to help, you know, transition yourself to then create some more momentum around your, subsequent investments. Did you know in that moment that like your life would likely change forever?
Yeah. It's interesting though, because it would be easy to retrospectively tell a story that like that day we sold was the life-changing moment. Like financially, that moment actually came much sooner. Like TradeMe was a very successful business before we sold it and had been paying dividends, and it had already changed my life financially before then. Like professionally, selling it was a bit of a distraction, to be honest. Like I was in the middle of building this team and we had a lot of problems we were trying to solve, and we were growing quickly. So in terms of the team I was managing, like there was a whole new challenge. So yeah, it's kind of weird, eh? Like it was a life-changing moment, of course, but the thing I like to say is like that's the day that everybody else realized. Like it wasn't easy to kind of explain how financially successful it was when we were a private company. But that day there was a press conference and all the numbers were out in the public, and then everybody knew, including all my immediate family and all the random members of the public that I talked to. So yeah, that was kind of the reveal day, not the life-changing day.
Yeah, that makes sense. And so like when TradeMe is sold, what does that process actually look like as a shareholder of, $750 million exit? Does that money come into your bank account straight away?
Yeah.
Does it take a few months?
Yeah.
Like, how does that pan out?
Each sale is a unique snowflake, I've learned, but I mean, that was my first. The thing that was remarkable about that sale, it was nearly all cash and it was 100% exit. So we sold the whole company for $700 million cash and $50 million, what's called earn out. So that was kind of like the performance-based part of the sale. And we actually got that $50 million over the next 2 years. But yeah, like the $700 million component was upfront cash. And yeah, I mean, there's a few little asterisks on that, but that money hits your bank account. So
crazy.
we were warned to contact the bank in advance and tell them
something's going on
something's going on, because otherwise it would probably have been flagged as fraud or something like that. So that was a weird phone call for me to make. It's kind of like, there's going to be a lot of money at the account in the next wee while.
Is the person on the other end also just like, what? They're quite curious?
Yeah. Well, I remember she asked actually, she's like, what do you want to do with it? And I was like, I've got no idea.
You're not my advisor.
I may as well pay off the mortgage, I guess, to start with, and then I'll think about that afterwards. I don't know.
What were like your first big like investments? Do you do anything with with your life changing that quickly?
I still haven't really. I mean, some people might be critical of that, but no, I didn't change anything straight away. The opposite, eh? Like I had a job. Like I stayed working at TradeMe for a year after that. I had a lot of unfinished business, and yeah, I got some good advice, I guess, around that time in terms of financial planning and all that sort of stuff. And a lot of that was don't rush. Like I was just 30 years old, so I was young.
That's crazy. 30 years old.
There was no rush.
Wow.
So I'm grateful for that advice with a benefit of hindsight. Like,
yeah, 100%. I mean, it could have just went so wrong as well. Like if you give that amount of money to most 30-year-olds, I feel like they're probably going down a different path. If you know what I mean. Yeah. What do you think is like one of the most misunderstood parts of being like an early stage investor? And I guess for my audience, we've got a whole range of different listeners. A lot of people will be, running their own business. A lot of them might be sort of interested in that stuff, or even like, casual investors themselves. So do you mind just sort of explaining like what does it mean to be an early stage investor and what is like misunderstood about it?
Yeah. So let me give you the then and now answer to that. Like the investments that I've had the most success with, like Vend and Timely, the two stories in the book, are kind of a function of their era a little bit. Like Vend was 2010, Timely was 2012. Like back then there wasn't really that much of a venture layer in New Zealand in terms of early stage investors. So the people who were doing investments were folks like me and random individuals. And so, yeah, like the thing that's most understood about that is I think there's kind of been a reality television takeover in people's minds. They think Dragon's Den or Shark Tank is kind of the mental model of it.
That's where I go to.
And it's just the complete opposite of that, eh? Like, I mean, as I describe in the book, both Vend and Timely, it was about a year from when I was first approached by the founders to when I actually, handed over cash and started working with them on it. And there was a lot of conversations in the meantime. I got to know them much better in the meantime, even though I knew them a little prior. So like it's almost the exact opposite of that, like one moment in front of the panel of investors with piles of cash. It's just that's all complete fake.
Yeah.
So that's the then. Like the now. In the meantime, like in the 10 years since then, there's been a much more a professionalization of that layer in New Zealand. So there are now multiple good venture funds with tens of millions of dollars to invest or more, with professional managers whose full-time job is to find the best founders and invest in them. And so like that's a very different model again. And yeah, I'm really conscious. I mean, I still do investments, but they've become sort of slightly different because I've got no interest in trying to compete with somebody who's doing like 1,000 coffee meetings a year to try and find the best founders,
Yeah.
So yeah, most of the investments that I do now are people that I already know well.
And like, how many investments can you have at any sort of given point of time?
Yeah.
Like, because I think you mentioned like that sort of diversification strategy. Like you almost do the sort of opposite of that.
Yeah. Again, I mean, another mental model that some people might have for early stage investment is like the angel club idea, which is like, a bunch of wealthy people who kind of have like a Rotary Club or Lions Club kind of approach to their investments, And yeah, the idea is that they invest a little amount in a lot of different companies, have a little portfolio of early stage companies. And I've, again, consciously tried to do the opposite of that. Like for me, the optimal number at any one time is probably like 2 or 3, maybe. And for most of that history, I've probably had twice that number. And that's partly why I've aged as much as I have. Like it's hard to manage even that small portfolio. So if you've got like 10 or 20 or more, I don't know how you can. Well, at that point, you're not really contributing to them because you can't really afford to put much time into them.
Yeah.
So you don't really help them other than with the very small amount of money that you've tipped in.
And are you looking at like what stage of a startup are you looking at when you make the decision to invest? Like how early into their sort of creation?
Yeah.
Do you look at how early do you go?
Yeah, I mean, again, I can only talk about the specific examples, right? Because it's not a big sample set. And the most successful companies that I've invested in have been right at the beginning, like just as they were getting started. The first investment that they took really is probably the ideal moment. And again, you can't do many of those because they're hard to find, good ones, and hard to tell. But yeah, that's the kind of dream, is to find a great founder right at the beginning and be their first believer. But yeah, I mean, I've done some investments slightly later stage than that. So there's so much jargon that gets wrapped around this. Like people talk about seed investment or Series A is kind of like the growing up investment round. And I don't really even know what all those words mean, to be honest with you. I think a lot of people who use them don't really know what they mean because they're not well defined.
Yeah.
It's a little bit. I would struggle to really succinctly define it because you know it when you see it, but until then you don't.
100%. So I guess like I think a lot of people listening to this, me included, I think because we're always chasing money, and money is a key factor in our life. And for a lot of people, it is reflective of, like stress and also like tough times.
Yeah.
I'd be keen to understand, Rowan, like when you have money, like what things change and also what things don't change.
Yeah.
I think for a lot of people, you think if you win the lotto or whatever, your life will just suddenly become so much better.
Yeah.
And like all of the worries and stress in your life will just dissipate.
Yeah.
But I got the feeling that, a lot of those same challenges, some challenges go away for sure, but there's still a lot of your life which, you don't, it's not like a silver bullet. Can you get your thoughts?
I think the lotto winners are kind of a very special case of this. So we should put them to one side because like that's complete chance and it happens suddenly, right? Whereas like the outcomes that I've had are, years of effort leading up to that outcome. And as I was sort of describing, like the life-changing moments are sometimes not so crisply defined as kind of like the Saturday night lotto draw. But yeah, I mean, the throwaway line that I like to use is having money is great because it gives you more time to worry about everything else. Like none of those other problems go away.
Yeah.
And in many people's experience by observation, they're actually accentuated. And yeah, maybe the reason for that is, again, like I've I'm lucky enough to know some people who've got lots of money. And this is probably true of me too. So I should be careful. But my observation is that everybody who has more money becomes more of what they already were. So like, it's an amplifier, if you know what I mean. So if you're a good person, it amplifies that. If you've got negative traits, it amplifies those. And maybe you're a bit more visible because of being a bit more of an outlier in that sense.
Yeah. I like that. So it makes you more of who you are.
Yeah,
it's a cool concept. Has it made it harder, I guess, to form like relationships with people as well? Like, do some people just see you as, I don't know, an investor or someone that is quite wealthy? Does it get hard to sort of break down genuine, authentic like connections with people?
It's a great question. I don't know, because it's just my reality, right? Maybe it does, but I think again, probably the nice side of that is that it amplifies the existing relationships you have if you can retain them, because they're authentic. Like I think one of the things that would be really difficult, I think, is like trying to forge those new relationships with people where you were nervous about the authenticity of it. So I'm really lucky to have some old friends who knew me well before any of this.
Yeah.
And I think if I had gone out and wildly changed, it probably would have destroyed a lot of those relationships.
100%.
But I haven't, and I've retained most of those, and they're just what they were.
Yeah, it's really interesting, and it's cool. Not often you get to sort of sit down and sort of ask those questions to someone. So yeah, thanks for answering them. I guess when it comes to the sort of different dynamics between Sam Morgan and Rod Drury, you mentioned in the book that Rod was like fiercely energetic. Just sort of operated around that level in comparison to maybe Sam, who excelled in other areas. How did working with Rod in particular like stretch your own thinking and approach to business?
Yeah, I mean, I would add Vaughan and Ryan from Vend and Timely to that. I've worked with 4 remarkable people, and they're all very different, which is kind of telling in itself, right? There's no one right answer to this. But yeah, I mean, Sam's a really demanding boss, partly because he's so often right. Do you know what I mean? Like he's, you're brave to bet against him.
True.
And if you like, one of the things that Trade Me was a very analytical organization in that sense. Like data would win arguments at Trade Me, even against Sam. Like I tell a story in the book of like my model of prioritization, where he would always come and most days with a great idea, and often they were really great. And we would have to kind of have that haggle about how we prioritize in all of these things, because we only have so much capacity. And so, if you had a structure like that, you could have a good conversation with him about that. Whereas Rod's much more irrational as a boss in that sense, much more faith-based, much more of a whirlwind. I think hurricane is the word I describe in the book, right? And that's much harder to kind of manage because it's more chaotic. But yeah, much more like it was invigorating for a short period of time to work with someone who could kind of create something out of nothing, just over and over again. Yeah. And yeah, the way I like to describe that is his hits were bigger, but his variability was also much more, which made it much harder to work with, because you were never quite sure whether this was a completely wacky idea or the next really great idea. It's harder to kind of manage around that. Yeah, in my experience.
And you mentioned a key point in the book. I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was something where you had a conversation with Rod, and you sort of like shut him down on something, and then you found out later he actually went over to someone else in the business and got him to sort of implement that. Yeah. I
mean, Xero was Rod's business, right? Like there was a co-founder, Hamish, that very fewer people know of. But yeah, Rod kind of was able just to manifest things into existence and convince people that things were imminent. Like this, again, there's a story in the book about a trip we did to Petone randomly to the New Zealand Post distribution center. And like, as we were driving back to the city, like I was kind of questioning whether that was actually good strategy, because we were way too early for that idea. And he's like, yeah, it's like, one day everyone will be connected. One day soon, I think everyone will be connected. The soon's important. And like, he was right about that, except for the soon. Like, like around the world now, there are millions of people connected exactly the way that he imagined. Yeah. But he was able to convince you that that was going to happen like imminently. And he was wrong about that. And so like managing that kind of, that mixture of very right and very wrong is kind of, it's quite chaotic.
Yeah, 100%. What sort of like lessons, I guess, in leadership do you bring upon your experience working with like 4 of these really like integral sort of founders? And obviously, you know, the word founder gets thrown around a lot.
Yeah.
Don't want to keep putting the emphasis on them, as your book sort of reiterates. It's
Yeah.
actually, you know, the whole company.
I mean, that would be my answer to that question, is I think this is one of the myths that we tell ourselves. Like, I call it the myth of the lone genius, because like the sort of questions you're asking me are very common. Like I get asked about these folks all the time, and no one ever asks me about Jesse Morgan. No one ever asks me about Hamish Edwards. No one ever asks me about Mel Russell, Vaughan's wife. No one ever asks me about Scoff, who was Ryan's co-founder, or Will, who's, most people never even heard of Will, who was the third Timely co-founder. And I think that's kind of interesting, right? Like those were not only not only were they integral to all of those businesses, but they were the very next after those crazy founders in terms of importance to all of those businesses. And so, yeah, it's like this common pattern where we put one person on a pedestal and ascribe the success of the whole organization to them.
Yeah.
And that's just not helpful, I don't think, to people who are thinking about their own venture, because again, there's lots of different personality types. And if you imagine that in order to be successful in a startup, you have to be that kind of crazy founder personality type, that's wrong. Like, I'm not that personality type. And yet I've been able to contribute a lot, hopefully, even those people would say, to these businesses, right? So there's roles for lots of different people, and we just don't do a very good job of telling the stories of person 2 through 500 in all these companies.
Why do you think it is? Is it just for convenience? Like, it's easier just to point at, you know, one person than to describe. You don't usually have the time.
Yeah,
to go through everything.
I think there's an element of that. Certainly, it doesn't fit so succinctly into a soundbite. Like the real stories are messy. So they're much harder to tell. So, I mean, there's 350 pages of me attempting to do that in there. But also, I think it also doesn't necessarily serve those folks. Like, you know, I've certainly benefited from being slightly under the radar in that sense. I've been able to just get on with it without all of that distraction that comes with that. So it's not even necessarily, like, the answer isn't necessarily put more people on the pedestal. But I think the answer is to be aware that one person doesn't create a company. It always takes a team of people.
It's so true, because you think about the like Steve Jobs, Peter Becks, Sam Morgans, but if you were to name like anyone else in those companies, man, I'd be
As I say, like, most people can't even name the second person.
No.
Like, who was the next person in Rocket Lab after Peter Beck?
Yeah, who knows?
You don't know that.
No,
I don't know that.
100%.
I should know that, but you know what I mean. Like, it is a fascinating pattern, that just, it's very common. You mentioned Steve Jobs, like, he's kind of like the canonical crazy one, right?
Yeah,
like he literally had this ad that was kind of a celebration of crazy ones. And yet, like, in multiple companies, Apple, Pixar, 2 great examples, he built like this formidable team of execs around him. And so, like, he knew this better than most people, that like you can kind of tell the story of the crazy one, but it's actually the group that makes success.
I was looking at the other day, just on a crazy side tangent around how much the world has changed, and it was like the first like presentation showing the iPhone, the very first
2007,
iPhone, not long ago at all. And he's like swiping the unlock to lock button, and the whole crowd are just like, "Whoa!"
It's for a start, it's a case study of like a keynote. Yeah, like, he does this famous trick where he's like, "We're gonna announce 3 products today. It's an iPod, it's a phone, and an internet communication device." He calls it. And then he just keeps repeating that until everyone in the crowd realizes it's actually one thing. It's the iPhone. It's all 3 of those things. It's like a beautiful presentation style. But yeah, the remarkable thing about that in the context of this story is that was just before the Xero IPO. So, like, we IPO'd Xero without really knowing that mobile devices would change the world, which is kind of a fascinating thought to have. Like, if you think about how much now smartphones are kind of baked into literally everything we do.
It's crazy. It's a Black Mirror episode.
It's relatively recent.
Yeah, it is absolutely wild. What scares you now, and what What excites you, Rowan?
Scares me. That's a good question. I haven't thought about that too much. Like I don't think I'm easily scared. Maybe that's my greatest weakness and my greatest strength all rolled into one. Is that going back to the story we were telling earlier, like I like to have plan B in mind in order to feel confident about plan A. So yeah, like, I mean, I even tell the story in the book of doing bungee jumps, for example. Like I have an irrational fear of heights.
Oh, right. True.
Or of high edges to be very specific. And kind of overcame that a little bit by doing bungee jumps. And my thought process around that was, no one's ever died. Like actually, it's not scary. Not in New Zealand. I think they have overseas, but like it's actually not as dangerous as it's presented to you as. So like, if you can sort of just be a little bit analytical, sometimes you can make fear go away. Yeah, that would be my answer for fear. What excites me? It's interesting, because like the last third of this book is kind of my takedown, for want of a better word, of what often gets called the ecosystem of startups. And a lot of people, I think, have heard what I've said about that sort of stuff over the years and imagined me to be like really cynical and negative about all of that stuff. And yet, I mean, I've been asked a lot in the process of launching this book about the state of the ecosystem. And my honest and like deeply believed answer to that is it's as good as it's ever been. And it's only going to get better from here. So, I mean, if you think about the why of all of this, like I pin it back to Paul Callahan, his famous talk in 2011, where he talked about these sorts of businesses being, underpinning our prosperity as a country. And he was right about that. I strongly believe that. And it's happening. It's not happening as fast as a lot of people would like, because an ecosystem takes generations to grow. Like we know that from the natural world, right? But there's really good evidence now that some of those patterns that people like me have talked about a bit over these years starting to happen. There's a lot of people who have had experience working on companies like Xero or Vend or Timely, who are now spinning out into their next ventures, whether as founders or execs that you've never heard of and will never hear of, or as investors, or in some cases, all three of those things. And you're seeing multiple examples of that. Like there was a time back in the day where I felt like I knew all of the good companies in New Zealand, all the good startups.
True.
And I definitely don't now. Like I'm constantly surprised by stories of people working on amazing things who have made great progress before I've ever heard of them. Yeah. And sometimes with, lots of venture investment, sometimes with no investment, sometimes with a big team, sometimes just them. Like there's no kind of canonical way. Yeah. But you're seeing that kind of proliferation, which is like, it's like a Cambrian explosion, if you want a sort of natural world kind of metaphor for that. And we should all be excited about that. Like if that works the way that is kind of talked about and hoped for and promised, then that makes us all more prosperous. That's exciting. Yeah,
100%. And was there any like part of the book for you on going through the process of writing it that was like the most confronting or like the hardest bit to write about?
Yeah.
Any stories sort of pop out in particular?
So let me tell you a story, or part of the behind the scenes, if you like, the director's commentary. Like the first version of that I submitted to an editor, I got this really confronting feedback, which was like, there's no credibility here because you haven't written about yourself enough.
Interesting.
So he's like, you've got all these patterns, business lessons, but who the hell are you? Was kind of, I'll summarize the feedback.
Right.
And that was really confronting. Like I went back to a lot of the writing that I'd done over the years, and I realized that I had never put myself in the middle of those stories. And so I had to go away and kind of think about and write a lot more of the personal anecdotes and those sorts of stories.
Is that hard for you?
Yeah, it doesn't come naturally. Like
No.
I don't like that.
Yeah.
But it was a really interesting exercise to be forced to do. And like that Corin story, for example, is a good example of that. Like there's actually heaps of those stories when you start digging for them, which are kind of not only fun and entertaining, but actually kind of explain explain the kind of context in many ways for the stories that they're wrapped around.
Yeah, I think particularly even with the podcast, I quite relate to that. Like, especially when I first started, and even now, like, I guess the role of like an interviewer or a podcast host that I see is to like elevate your guests,
Somebody else.
yeah. And like, I remember when I first started, heaps of people were like, why aren't you mentioning about, you know, your story of when you're a teen dad, and I was like, I just don't want to. I don't want to. It's quite hard to sort of speak about. It's not about me.
Yeah,
it's about the person.
Yeah. You need to go on somebody else's podcast for that, probably, right?
I know,
because
right?
I think it is a different role. I
Yeah.
think that sort of explains it a bit for me too. Like, I've never really figured my role in any of this is to try and make myself famous or to capture all of the credit for any of this.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, the opposite. Like, I've learned over the years that letting go of that creates better outcomes, including for me, selfishly. So yeah, it's like, I mean, yeah, you probably need to go on someone else's podcast and have them ask the questions
100%.
that you would never think to talk about yourself.
Totally.
And that was kind of the role, I guess, that editor unwittingly played for me. It was kind of like forcing me to go away and think about the bullet points of all the stories.
So you actually have to change the book quite a lot after
Yeah,
that.
I mean, it got broadly rewritten after that.
Yeah.
And it got much better with that feedback.
Nice. I think what else I was keen to touch on is, and I think a lot of people get this perception as well that, you know, if they did, you know, like with money, the concept like never working again. And I just think that if you had enough money to retire, which you obviously have done and have attempted to retire, like so much of your like ambition and purpose comes from your mahi, from your work.
Yeah.
And I think when people say that, like, oh, I'd never work again, it's
Yeah.
like, I highly doubt you actually would never work again.
Yeah.
What's your thoughts on that?
So it's actually impossible to do nothing. Like, there's no such thing as nothing. You're doing something, and maybe you'll be happy playing golf all day, or maybe you'll be happy, you know, going to Fiji and drinking cocktails all day. But I doubt it. And I especially doubt it if you're the sort of person that's created these sorts of outcomes. Like, and this is, again, just my observation, not only for myself, but of most of the other folks that I know who have had that kind of result, is that's not what gets you there. You know, like, the ambition is not to never work again. The ambition is actually to work in the first place on something that you're passionate about and want to make great. And so when you do get those outcomes, I don't know, everybody seems to ask, cool, what's the next level? And, you know, I mean, I don't want to give you the perception that I don't have an amazing life either. Like, we've done some amazing things post these outcomes, and I don't often feel like I'm working in the traditional sense. Like, I don't work for other people. I don't feel an obligation to do things that I don't want to do. But I still work like irrationally hard in many people's eyes.
100%.
Which is kind of hard to explain, but
yeah, 100%. Where do you get, like, for your own mental health? This is something we ask like most guests as well. Like, when things get stressful, or, you know, if you're feeling down or in a slump, like, what are the things that you do, Rowan, to protect and look after your well-being?
Yeah, I've got pretty good self-awareness about this. I wouldn't say it's protecting my well-being necessarily, but I eat or run.
Eat or run.
Yeah.
One of those two.
And
you've done a few Ironmans, haven't you?
I've done over the years a lot of running, and, you know, all the other bits that get wrapped around that. But yeah, also probably a bit too much eating. So one kind of counterbalances the other. But yeah, I mean, I think we all have our stress responses, right? For me, that kind of physical kind of challenge is a really nice counterbalance to some of that. And yeah, just getting out in nature too, kind of, you know, those are good moments normally. But yeah, I mean, often it's a good example of an activity that's not fun in the moment.
Type 2 fun.
Type 2 fun. So Melinda calls it type 2 fun. So in the book, I call that deep fun.
Yeah.
Like, you can think about fun having two dimensions. So I'll give you this little pattern. The first dimension is whether it's fun in the moment or not. So, like, are you enjoying it right now? And then the second dimension is whether, when you reflect back later on it, you say that it was fun in the full sense of that word. And then that gives you four different things, right? So not fun in the moment, not fun later, that's just not fun.
Not fun.
Not fun. No. And then like fun right now and fun later, that's just pure fun. And like you should avoid not fun, and you should take every opportunity for pure fun, because those are rare, and when they come along, amazing. But then the other two are the really interesting ones. So shallow fun is it's fun right now, but you're going to regret it later. And I'm sure you can think of lots of examples of things like that, you know, posting on social media when you're angry.
Yeah, 100%.
Or
eating,
drinking too much, or eating too much, all those things. That's shallow fun. And deep fun is the opposite, eh? Like it's often not fun in the moment. It's hard in the moment. But when you reflect on it later, it's really satisfying. So this is my famous Richie McCaw quote. Like he was asked about whether playing rugby was fun. And he's like, nah, but it's satisfying to win. And so like that's I think deep fun is kind of the best fun. Shallow fun is kind of, I think mostly should be avoided. And that just makes me sad. Like, because like, you know, I'm not the sort of, you know, go and have fun every moment kind of person. But you can achieve a lot if you're willing to do the hard work in the short run that you reflect on later and say, yeah, that was deeply satisfying.
Yeah. That's where like most growth happens, I see as well. Like that's where you can really push yourself to the limits, whether it's doing a Ironman or running a marathon. Like that's where you discover you've got a lot more in the tank.
Yeah, sometimes, or else you find your limit. Like I did Coast to Coast just over a year ago.
Oh no way! How was that?
Really hard, like deep fun in the pure sense of that word. Like, and you find even in the preparation, like you find those moments where you're like, actually, this might actually be the limit. How interesting. Like for me, like whitewater kayaking was a brand new skill, and like, you know, I'm in my late 40s. It's kind of confronting to learn a completely new skill at that age. And there were a few moments as I was doing that where I was like, you know, nah, this is just hard. And I'm not sure that there's going to be a payback that kind of justifies this hard. But yeah, I'm pleased that I pushed through that particular one, because you find sometimes that there is another level. But yeah, it's fun to find the limit, you know. And,
it is.
and
most people never find it.
And work out what you can and can't do. Yeah.
So with Coast to Coast, is that from the West Coast? Do you start? And then
so you start on just on the West Coast to Spy Greymouth and up and over the Alps to Christchurch.
Crazy. So what sort of distances are you covering across the running?
I don't think the distances are the interesting bits of that race. I mean it's like 200 and something kilometers in total, which is a combination of cycling, mountain running, kayaking.
Crazy. And
then more cycling. The thing that makes it interesting is the terrain. Like to call it running is slightly misleading, because there's bits of it that are like these massive big boulders on a riverbed, kind of you're scrambling. And also you're knackered by the end, or I was. And so, you know, you're good just to put one foot in front of the other for a few bits of that.
And then you see Richard McCaw just jogging past you. Like it's nothing.
I never saw him. He was miles in front. But yeah, I don't want to give you the impression that I'm any sort of athlete. Like I think I've written about these stories, but like the really good athletes in these events are literally twice as fast as me, which is a really humbling thing, right? But the reason I do it is not to win. Like there's other parts of my life where I'm much more competitive at what you'd call an elite level in terms of sport. But with this stuff, it's like it's entirely about the challenge of doing it against myself.
Totally.
And proving to myself that I can do those things, and for the endorphins at the end, like
100%.
The feeling at the finish when you've done something really deeply hard, fun 100%. Like that is hard to beat.
I did the Queenstown Marathon like 2 years ago or so.
Awesome. That's the only marathon I've ever done as well.
Oh, it's beautiful.
It's a great course.
It is stunning. And I hit an absolute wall. I hit the Great Wall of China.
Yeah.
And
at like 30 Ks?
Yeah, 100%. And everyone would talk about it. I think it was like 32 is where I just lost my mind.
Yeah.
And everyone talks to you about it. You're like, yeah, I'll know what to do. And I just melted down. And my goal was sub 4. I got like 4:03.
Oh, yeah.
So I don't know. It was interesting, but it made me think, because I was pretty bummed afterwards. I was like, fuck, if only I didn't like walk for like 3 minutes.
Yeah.
That would have been sweet.
Yeah.
But at the end, I remember vividly like going to the end of the finish line And this was after I'd like had some water, rehydrated, and I was looking like, I reckon the real heroes of that race are those that are finishing on like hours.
8 hours, yeah.
Yeah, like that. There's some big rigs out there,
Yeah.
and they're getting through 42 kilometers.
Yeah.
I was like, you have all my respect.
I was support at Ironman in Taupo one year, and like the most inspiring people are the people who finish like at midnight.
Yeah.
And they're like grandmothers, or, you know, like double amputees, or, you know, it's just like these amazing, inspiring stories. And it's so humbling to go and stand there and watch them finish. Like I was literally in tears.
100%.
Even though you never met them, never see that, you know, you don't know half, you know, 1/10 of their story, but just seeing what they've pushed through to even get to that finish line. And then you realize that everybody else is a baby. Like anybody who says they can't do that should just go and stand there at like 11:40 p.m. and watch, because there's people who are much less capable than most of us who somehow get through it.
Yeah, it's an amazing thing about sport, eh? It is incredible. So, and Rowan, can you touch on quickly before we wrap things up? You're doing some awesome work with the Hoku Foundation, which is like the charitable not-for-profit arm of your like family office. Yeah, can you speak to like what was the inspiration for starting that? I know you got a massive focus on like supporting young people into like employment. Yeah, what was the impetus of starting that up?
So we actually started in 2008. So it was kind of the sleeper cell that's been kind of bubbling away for a long time. So yeah, a couple of years after the Trade Me sale, we sort of set the structure up and started funding it without a real clear idea of exactly what it might be in the fullness of time. And there were a lot of experiments in those first few years, sort of learned by doing. But yeah, as you say, we've settled on 3 focus areas actually. But yeah, I'll talk to one, which is the one you mentioned. So the government calls it NEET, which stands for Not in Employment, Education or Training, which to me is like this massive negative framing of the things, like all the things you're not.
Totally.
So I much prefer to flip it around. And as you say, youth employability is kind of really what we're describing. So these are you know, kids who aren't in school but haven't found their way into paid employment for various reasons. And the really cool thing about that is like lots of people, when you're asked about the charitable stuff or philanthropy, people will often ask what your focus areas are. And, you know, they're looking for, you know, we're focused on the environment, or we're focused on poverty, or we're focused on housing or whatever. And like, that's great. Like it's fine to kind of describe what you do from the top down, but I'm sort of way more interested in the bottom up, because ultimately what you do is you give money to organizations who do the work, or else you start your own organization to do the work, which is some other people's version of philanthropy. It's not what we do. We fund others. But it's like those organizations who make the difference or not, right? And so like it's great for you to have this focus area and say, yeah, we're focused on youth employability. But unless you've found great organizations who actually do that, it's irrelevant. So like connecting those dots is really what it's all about for us. As you know, we've done some work together on this. And so yeah, like it's one of the great things about that particular focus area is there are heaps of great organizations doing the work on the ground to you know, create better outcomes for those people. And all we need to do is find the great ones and help them a little bit with funding. Like that's a very easy job for us to do relative to what they do. So.
Why did you land on youth employability after, you know, you mentioned housing, so many other sort of areas? What brought you and the foundation to focus on that issue? So
one of the things we realized a few years ago was that like we're really hard on the organizations that we fund to have that kind of theory of change, we call it, like that, you know, an idea about why they're doing what they're doing. And we hadn't really done that work ourselves. So we kind of shone the spotlight back on ourselves and said, right, you know, if we were going to narrow our focus, which we needed to do then because we'd gotten very wide, like what areas would we invest in if we were trying to invest where we could have the biggest impact? And so, yeah, I mean, this is where we did some work together to try and understand, like, what does the data suggest there? Like, if you take it unemotionally, what are the areas where data would suggest that kind of investment could have the biggest bang for buck? And like the ones that drop out are actually reasonably self-evident. And I mean, the amazing thing about that particular focus area is if you can create a slightly better outcome for somebody when they're like 16 and, you know, at the lowest point really, then things could be better for them for the rest of their life, which can be a long time. So like, you know, hold that up alongside like a pure investment sort of mindset compared to helping somebody right at the end of their life, for example, and the impact is much smaller.
Yeah.
So yeah, just like really analytically kind of breaking that down to say, what are the areas where you can have a real long and significant impact, and what are the areas where we can reasonably find organizations working in that space that we can fund and that will make a difference. So it's a real bottom up way of kind of approaching that, rather than sort of saying like the area we care about the most is X or Y or Z.
It's a cool way to frame it. Yeah, it's something I'm real passionate about. I was at the Mayor's Task Force for Jobs for a few years, and man, you hear so many stories from. I think we worked with one lady, and she had like really poor dental hygiene.
Yeah,
and she was in like a sort of hospitality setting, and we managed to get some funding out to her to completely get her like a full-on dental reconstruction.
Yeah,
and it meant she was able to like retain her job.
Yeah.
And also, just really stay in the workforce and
Yeah.
be like more confident in yourself too. So,
like the multiplier effect of a relatively modest investment.
Yep.
Driver's license is another
Driver
one.
licensing.
Like, it's incredible how impactful that can be.
Pathway to a job.
And sometimes all it requires sometimes is a relatively modest, like, somebody to help with some lessons, even just take you to the testing place and make sure you do the test when you need to do and things like that. So
needs to be in all high schools, I reckon. You should
driver education.
Yeah, you should leave high school with at least your learners.
Oh man, if high schools did all the things that would be good to do in high school, like kids would never come home.
Yeah, 100%. Hey, thanks so much, Rowan, for jumping on, man. This has been such an awesome chat. I've got lots out of this, and Moana Road, who's one of our key sponsors, they give a pair of nice sunnies to
awesome.
all of our guests. So
I've
that's
seen
all
these in the
yours.
shop.
We'll finish with some quick fire questions. They're quite deep and philosophical, so you'll probably like them. Then finish with a quote. But before we do, where can people keep in touch with you and your mahi?
Oh yeah, so if people are interested in the book, there's they can buy that online. Just go to howtobewrongbook.com and follow your nose from there. In terms of my writing, it's all on my own site, so rowansimpson.com. And you find me in various places online, all the normal places.
We'll chuck a link in the description wherever you're watching or listening to this podcast. Okay, quick fire questions. Rowan, what brings you true happiness?
Spending time with people I know well.
What is the meaning of life?
I don't know. I think it's easy to just sort of fill the void with words when you ask questions like that. But I'll be honest, I haven't worked it out yet. Maybe we can work it out together, and maybe that's the meaning. I don't know.
Advice you wish you knew about when you were younger?
I wasn't very good at following advice that old people gave me when I was younger. We talked about a partner at the firm I was working in. So I think advice to my younger self would be keep thinking about it for yourself, and don't just do what old people tell you to do.
Don't just do what old people tell you to do like that. What does legacy mean to you? I feel like these need to be multi-choice. I don't know. I heard this awesome metaphor the other day, which is some people derive happiness from planting trees that they'll likely never sit under, and other people enjoy sitting under trees that other people have planted. I'm definitely kind of the former, which, there's pros and cons. But I guess, if you follow that metaphor, it's the trees you plant that other people will enjoy. Maybe the book is a tangible part of that for me. If you could change one thing in New Zealand, what would this be?
I've written about this. I wish we would stop calling ourselves a small country a long way away from anywhere. Like, we're actually not a small country. Like, the land area is massive, which is very lightly populated. And I would love for us to reframe that as New Zealand is the biggest small country. So then we wouldn't get excited about punching above our weight, which is like this kind of natural obsession.
That. Yeah.
It's like actually if we were the biggest small country, you'd expect the most from us rather than the least. So that's a mindset shift.
We love that whole underdog, eh? Like,
honestly,
punching up to Australia.
Per capita, oh my God. Don't get me started.
The buzzword.
Yeah.
And what do you believe is the main thing that is holding back young people in New Zealand?
Investment in education, public education especially, which is not to say we don't spend much. We spend heaps, but we could invest it probably much. We could spend more and invest it more wisely.
Fantastic. Thank you, Rowan. We'll finish with this quote by Naval Ravikant, who's an entrepreneur and investor. A fit body, a calm mind, a house full of love. These things cannot be bought. They must be earned.
Nice.
Cheers, mate. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.